Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, Google I.O. goes big, Daydream VR, new headsets, motion controllers, Google Home, guns for Alexa, and oh yeah, NVIDIA's new GTX 1080 is epic, and 1070 is on the way. All that and more coming up next on TWiCH.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
Bandwidth for TWiCH is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 364, recorded May 19th, 2016. Google I.O. and whoa, GTX 1080.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Wealthfront. Wealthfront is a low-cost automated investment service and the most sophisticated way to invest your money. Whether you've got millions or you're just starting out, visit wealthfront.com/TWiCH and sign up to get your free personalized investment portfolio. That's wealthfront.com/TWiCH.
Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, live from beautiful downtown Petaluma, California, in the legendary Brick House. Joining me, as always, from beautiful Florence, Kentucky, Mr. Ryan Shrout, who is mocking me and my antique automobile.
No, I mock nobody. I haven't said anything. Why?
Oh,
it's not me.
That's not you?
No.
You sure? Maybe it was Alan.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that one.
It could be Alan.
Yeah.
Doom, sir. Have you been playing Doom?
I have played approximately 1 hour of Doom.
That is incredible because for anybody who isn't up to speed on Ryan's personal life, there is a small child at home, a baby, and a spouse, which means game time is probably relegated to a far, far back burner that is only visible using scientific instruments. So for an hour on Doom is pretty epic. Are you excited? Is it everything you hoped for? Or are you just like, why?
It's
Why?
really, really good. It is really, really fun. I basically installed it yesterday before our podcast because I wanted to have. I said I need to have played this for at least an hour before I want to go have any more conversations about gaming and PC hardware because I feel like that's all anybody is really talking about on the gaming side. And all the reviews have been extremely positive. I would say surprisingly so from my point of view. And if you look back at kind of the history of the development of the game, it's been in development for 8 years. It was completely canned and started from scratch at one point. But the gameplay matches perfectly with what people wanted.
Right.
It is a modern shooter in some ways, but very different from any kind of modern FPS game in most other ways. You know, like you don't have regenerating health, and it's a very fast game. Like you are the shift button that you hold down actually puts you into a walk instead of a run, right? So you're always running except when you hold down the shift button. You have huge jump speeds. I think, there was a number, I don't remember offhand, but there was some extraordinary miles per hour, which is what if you mapped out the Doom walking speed, the original Doom game walking speed, it was like 71 miles an hour or something, I don't know, something like that. And it feels like they've re-instigated or re-implemented that into this game. And it's fun and it looks good. It runs really well. You don't have to have a GTX 1080 to play it. Like I said, it's gotten pretty positive reception from everywhere I've looked, and that's kind of rare and unexpected.
And delightful, actually. I mean, the development story is kind of like classic id. It'll be done when it's done. It got done when it was done. I've heard some snarfling about the multiplayer sort of Quake side of things, but the game itself is like all of the crazed adrenaline mayhem from the original Doom, but with much, much better graphics. Speaking of which, GTX 1080, 8GB Founders Edition review, we're going to get to that in a couple minutes. We should talk, though, about Google I.O., or as I've titled it here in the rundown, Holy Frickin' Google I.O., because they dropped a lot more than I certainly expected in the last couple days. Daydream, Android Power VR, a new VR headset and motion controller, Google Home, Android Wear 2.0, the concept of Tensor processing units, but I think the big one's really the Android-powered VR, which is not going to work, unlike Cardboard, it's the step up. Daydream is the step up from Cardboard. It is not going to work on every single phone out there. There's going to be sensors. Basically, they're going to require certain sensors inside of there to actually function with it. The motion controller is, I think, an absolute necessity in a post-HTC Vive world or a post-HTC Vive launch world. And you can see if you're watching the video, you can see the motion controller, which kind of looks like a flattened Apple TV controller to give a loose approximation. But what's interesting about it is they are, once again, like cardboard. They're not giving instructions for how to make the new VR headset and controller, but they're basically letting anybody who wants to make the new headset and VR controller. And one of the interesting stories that came out of that was also Ina Fried over at Recode found out that Google's actually going to be competing with its partners and will sell its own Daydream virtual reality headsets, which are essentially very similar to a certain product we saw from Samsung, which is basically strap a phone to your face, but with the addition of a motion controller. So are you excited about this, or are you completely overwhelmed with VR at this point, Ryan?
It seems like there's so much stuff all happening at the same time. I think the idea of having Google create a platform for it makes a lot of sense, and I think it will actually improve things in the long run.
Right.
As opposed to having, when I was at Mobile World Congress, Samsung had their thing, and LG had their thing, and Huawei talked about doing their own thing. And as a game developer, as a content creator, kind of supporting all those platforms from 3 different vendors with probably 3 different APIs becomes very complex.
Right.
You know, Samsung had the backing of Oculus, so you had some kind of avenue in there. But I think with Google kind of coming in and saying, hey, if you want to do it on a phone, here's a platform with which you can, you know, address and implement and improve on in your own ways. I think that'll be a big change. I think they did announce today officially that they were going to make their own headset.
Yes, and that's what I was talking about. Ina Fried. So basically, that Google Google will be competing with anybody making Daydream headsets and motion controllers, which is a little bit different. But if you're an Android phone manufacturer, probably feels really familiar. In some ways, I mean, this will be interesting because this essentially puts them in competition with Samsung. And a lot of what I think Samsung and Google will be fighting over, maybe at different market segments, is the idea that if the phablet is the primary computing tool for a huge part of the world, you know, will people with $600 for a headset and $1,000 gaming PC define the VR experience, or is that going to be defined, you know, by $600 phones and $100 worth of, you know, $50 or $100 worth of add-on gear to go along with that? I'll be really curious to see how it plays out. I think you're absolutely right. It's got to be frightening to be a developer right now. You know, if you're like, okay, so I've got this platform with a little bit of market share, this platform with a little bit of market share, that platform with a little bit of market share, several, you know, also rans that aren't going to go anywhere, and which one do I support and how heavily do I support them?
Right.
I don't know. It sounds exciting or terrifying.
I think it's in the software side of things that they showed off, the demos that they've showed in terms of here's how you access the App Store, here's how you access your apps, looks really good. There's a lot of similarity to how Oculus built theirs, right, in terms of how you address everything. I mean, even the controller, you know, I guess you can't make, you know, 2-button controllers in any kind of varying way, but it looks oddly like the Oculus controller. You know, but hey, if you can get away with it, do it, right? Because this is something that needs standardization, needs to be homogenized to some degree, so that developers, VR won't be successful until developers are making money on it, and then they want to continue making software. If they make one piece of software and it flops and they failed and they'd lost a bunch of money, they're not going to come back, and in which case the whole platform suffers. So yeah.
No, I was going to say, I mean, when you put it that way, you know, Android, despite being this numerically superior platform in terms of volume, has always kind of paled by comparison to developer revenue generated on iOS devices. So, you know, maybe that's what we need is yet another competing VR platform, but from Apple. That was meant to be snarky in case it wasn't clear.
I mean, it'll obviously happen at some point, right?
Right.
Like, don't you just have to assume it? If Facebook and Google are in it, like Apple being the one guy kind of out uninvolved seems odd for them.
Maybe they're waiting for Amazon to go all in. Oh, my goodness. Speaking of Amazon and the Echo, my partner in crime, Shannon, over on Tech Thing, is in love with her Amazon Echo. Alexa apparently is heard throughout her house on an irregular but relatively constant basis. And, of course, ever since the Amazon Echo came out of nowhere, the tube that listens, if you will, It now allows you to buy things from Amazon.com, and will turn your. It's interesting to watch, right? My long and painful introduction here is to point out that Google has decided that you can now sign up. Pre-releases are available, or pre-signatures, pre-sale signups are available for Google Home, which is another voice-activated product. Get answers from Google, stream music, manage everyday tasks. A home automation center. So that little splash of 4-button Google colors on the top. There's a big old speaker inside of it. Part of what was really interesting that The Verge pointed out was that Mario Quiroz, the executive behind the project, is the person who was the product manager or the person who brought the Chromecast to life. So this is interesting to me because the Chromecast is an incredibly popular piece of hardware. It's this incredibly functional piece of hardware. It's this incredibly inexpensive piece of hardware that people love. And now the kind of person, the driving force behind that is doing, a voice-activated home automation appliance that ties in directly to Google. And I'm really curious to see how well this does. They've pointed out that it's not going to do as much as Alexa. That's intentional. I'm very curious to see what it ends up doing, and once it ships, what kind of additional features that people add on to it. But
when you say it's not going to do as much as Alexa, what type of stuff are they referring to that may be left out, like the shopping side of things?
Well, I would assume at this point, it's going to have The Verge pointed out it's going to have a smaller set of home automation devices. It's basically a standalone home for Google's voice assistant. Okay. At this point, it doesn't have a lot of third-party extensions going on for it, which I think is the biggest deal. That said, this is Google. Google owns Nest. I think they'll figure out a way to start knitting all of this together. At least I hope.
I do too.
It would be nice, although they've been sort of onboarding and offboarding home automation products in a painfully intense way. It's interesting. It's kind of at the same time this came out. The Wall Street Journal did an article talking about how hard Amazon is working to extend Echo and to make it available to control all the things in the house. Right, coming up with less expensive devices. There's going to be the technology is going to show up in Ford cars, which I am excited to hear and slightly nervous to hear. It doesn't bother me so much if you can talk to your Ford and open the garage door, but if somebody figures out how to way to hack into the Ford to start your motor, it's going to be really interesting. It's exciting to watch. Because everybody wants to talk to the computer. Everybody wants to get their Star Trek on. I just want to see how fast it's going to roll up and how complicated it's going to be and how walled the gardens are going to be for all the devices out there. So, are you still wearing your Android Wear watch?
It's actually sitting on my desk over there. No, I have a Pebble that I still the newer Pebble.
Okay.
That I wear. No, I haven't used Android Wear since my Moto 360. I guess was the last one I had.
So it's been a while.
I would go back. I would absolutely try it again. I need better battery life is what I want, right? The fact that I can wear that Pebble for 4 days and not have to worry about taking a charger with me wherever I go somewhere overnight is a big advantage. But I don't think it would take a lot for me to give up for it, or a lot of functionality if they weren't going to promise me additional battery life.
No, that makes sense. One of the things that came out of I/O was Android Wear 2.0. The idea is kind of like some of the things we've heard about the Apple Watch, making it more independent, making it more functional. It's a video from a hands-on demo from The Verge that you're looking at right now. New handwriting recognition, QWERTY keyboards, third-party app complications that have been adding in there. A new user interface, which I think is desperately needed for almost every device that goes on your wrist and pretends to connect to your phone or connects to your phone. But we'll see those starting to come out later this year. And then the last thing I thought was particularly interesting that came out of Google I/O, since apparently I am in Google I/O fest mode today, was their custom chips, Tensor processing units. So Did you get a chance to read up about some of these?
I mean, I read what they like this blog page that we're looking at, and there's really
nothing else.
Like not a lot of information about it. I'm trying to look. I did some Googling the other day and found a picture from some random website from, about 8 months ago.
Right.
That was talking about one of these. And it listed some kind of basic specs and capabilities. Now, what the hell did I do with it? Here it is. The TPU XIO card they were talking about that's about the size of a hard drive.
Right.
They talk about it having 10 floating point functional units that are rated at 1.5 gigaflops, 12 application-specific functional units rated at 3.1 gigaops, but they don't talk about what those operations are specifically because they're application-specific, and then 8 megabytes of SRAM capable of 6.4 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. So one of them, like, it doesn't sound impressive because of the gigaflop. Like, we just, the GTX 1080 is a 9 teraflop compute GPU. And this is 1.5 gigaflops, but it is the 12 application-specific functional units that sound pretty interesting to me that are probably giving them the huge efficiency capability that they were talking about during Google I/O.
Yeah, I mean it's a custom device. It's designed to accelerate TensorFlow. TensorFlow. You can get deep into that, but the idea is that they're using data flow graphs to organize the processing of information. It can execute asynchronously. It can execute in parallel. But it's kind of crazy. Like 100 different teams inside of Google are using machine learning, and TensorFlow is a way to do machine learning. The TPU custom chip is a way to accelerate TensorFlow, but Street View, Inbox Smart Reply, Voice Search, and they've been using these to grossly accelerate the speed of machine learning. I just thought it was kind of fascinating. They also went from tested silicon to running in their data centers in 22 days, which I also thought was pretty amazing. TPUs power rank brain, the relevancy of search result, or improving the relevancy of search results in Street View. And then AlphaGo was, quote, powered by TPUs in the matches against Go world champion Lee Sedol, enabling it to think much faster and look farther ahead between moves. So again, Google is in the lead as being the basis of Skynet.
Yeah. I watched part of it. I think it was yesterday when they were showing the robots learning how to pick things up.
Yeah.
It was, and then they showed one of these robot arms scooted something out of the way with the grabber before it picked up the object that was targeting it. He's like, we didn't teach it to do that. It just figured out that was the best way to have the most success of picking up the object. And I thought for sure we were all done for at that point. All it's got to do is scoot the humans away a little bit, and then it can get to whatever it really needs, right? Whatever its programmed goal was.
Well, let's try not to, let's not get between the computer and its bandwidth and the computer and its power, and hopefully they won't shove us out of the way and, turn us into copper tops. Man, that's a frightening thought. What isn't frightening, ladies and gentlemen, is saving for what you want, whether it's a home, whether it's retirement, whether it's just being smart and creating a financial cushion to protect your future. Look, we want to tell you this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Wealthfront. You invest for the long term for you or your family's financial health, but trying to do it yourself, especially the right way, is complex. It's time-consuming. Luckily, there's Wealthfront. Traditional advisors, financial advisors, they charge a lot of money, between 1% and 3% of what they manage every year. With Wealthfront, you pay 1/4% a year. That's 25 basis points. Zero commissions, no hidden fees. We're talking about $5 a month to invest a $30,000 account. There are no additional charges for any Wealthfront services. With Wealthfront's new portfolio review, you can see if your portfolio is at risk, how diversified your investments are, what are you losing to fees, even minimize your taxes. The idea is to make all this stuff that seems so complicated when you're talking to a broker seem simple and obvious and easy to understand. You can get started investing today with as little as $500. And if you're young, I suggest you start now, because a little bit of money saved now turns into a lot of money later on. It only takes a few minutes to sign up at wealthfront.com, and it goes right to work monitoring your portfolios around the clock, taking action as soon as an opportunity arises. It's transparent. It's accessible. You can view and track all your accounts in one place. And now Wealthfront can track both your Wealthfront and your non-Wealthfront bank and brokerage accounts in a summary of all your assets. You can see every trade Wealthfront makes on your behalf in your dashboard, on your desktop, or with their mobile app. Wealthfront's process is based on Nobel Prize-winning academic research and the best investment practices. They want to make you money, people. And we've heard from many TWiT fans who've used Wealthfront and love how they can diversify their portfolios and buy stocks from in-demand companies like Apple, Amazon, and Facebook, and it's all commission-free. Wealthfront manages almost $3 billion in client assets, and it's growing rapidly every day. What are you waiting for? Invest in your future today with Wealthfront. Do us a favor, visit wealthfront.com/twitch to sign up and get your free personalized investment portfolio. You'll see the customized allocation they recommend for your profile. And just for TWiT listeners, if you sign up to invest, Wealthfront will manage your first $15,000 entirely free of charge for life. Join the many TWiT fans who have seen huge success with Wealthfront and claim your offer today at wealthfront.com/TWiCH. That's wealthfront.com/twitch. We want to thank Wealthfront for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. Bring it to me. GTX 1080 8GB Founders Edition review. Is it awesome?
There you go.
Is it incredible?
It really, really, really is an impressive part. So GeForce GTX 1080 reviews went up. It'll go on sale on May 27th at $599 for some cards, maybe, hopefully. But chances are, only thing available on that day will be the $699 Founders Edition parts. But partners will have $599 parts relatively soon. It is a beast of a video card, right? This is the first consumer graphics card that's built on 16 nanometer technology, and with that, like, the inherent benefit is lower power and higher clocks, and we get both of those here, right? We're talking about performance or clock speeds that are 42% faster than Maxwell.
Nice.
And you're getting 25% more processors, more CUDA cores on the GTX 1080 if you're comparing this to the GTX 980. The rated boost clock is 1733 megahertz with a base clock of 1607. And we were able to overclock over 2 gigahertz without a whole lot of effort involved, right? Basically using your standard, monitoring software that you drag some sliders around and boom, you're done. It's got GDDR5X memory, 180 watts. It's an impressive part. We knew about the specifications from last week when they did their announcement. I guess almost 2 weeks ago now,
right?
For the release. But it is, performance-wise, it lived up to a lot of the claims. Now, some of the claims are still, so their kind of base claim from 980 to 1080 is that you would get 1.7x gaming performance, and that's actually pretty close. In my testing, we did 7 different games. 3 of them were DX12. The rest were DX11. The GTX 1080 was never slower, never less than 52% faster than the 980.
Which is crazy.
Which is awesome, right? And in a couple of cases, it was like 98% faster than a GTX 980, so almost 2x the performance. So the 1.7 number feels right in line with what the results that I had. So I'll give it to them there. They also had like a VR performance claim where they claimed 2.7x performance of the 980 from the 980 to the 1080. And that is a combination of just the raw compute performance differences that I just talked about to get up to the 1.7. And then 2 new technologies that are complex. It's part of a simultaneous multi-projection, which is this ability. The new technology in this architecture is, it's on the slide there. It's a functional block inside the geometry processing section that essentially allows a GPU for the first time to render and set up multiple projections with the overhead of a single one. So a projection is simply a window into this 3D world, right? So think of it this way: game engine builds a 3D world, and then it has to know what the projection of the viewer is. How are you looking? What is the camera? What is it actually looking at, right? It's usually drawn as kind of a 2D plane, looks like a window. That is your projection into the world. Usually, if you wanted to have multiple projections, say you had racing games, racing simulator games, these already existed, where you had your front window, but you didn't want to just do like NVIDIA Surround or Infinity on the monitors. You actually wanted to have looking out your left window, looking out your right window, so you could actually have the monitors in kind of different locations. Games could do that with multiple projections, but it had 3 times as much setup work to go through to do it. They actually have to set up the world 3 individual times and do all the geometry processing 3 individual times. What this SMP block does inside of Pascal is that it actually allows it to, the GPU can render, not render, it can draw the world all at once. It can kind of set up all the geometry one time for all the projections, up to 16 actually. And then that geometry can flow through the system normally. You still have to, do all the pixel shading that you would do. The number of pixels doesn't change, but it's all the vertex shader, tessellation shader, geometry shader work only has to be done one time. And VR uses this in 2 ways. It has a thing called single pass stereo, where the whole idea of VR is you render a left eye and a right eye, and how GPUs do it today is they render one projection for your left eye and one projection for your right eye. So SMP, this multi-projection stuff, basically lets you do that in one pass. That's part of your performance savings. And they do one called lens match shading, which basically, instead of rendering a full resolution square square of pixels, they limit the pixels they get rendered into a shape very close to that of the lens of the head unit, of like your head-mounted display, so that they're saving. Basically, I think they dropped from rendering 2.1 megapixels per eye down to 1.4 megapixels per eye, which is more closely matching what actually gets output into the head-mounted display. So those 2 technologies, which are admittedly, they're way more complex than you can talk about in like a 10-minute segment. I mean, they're complex enough. We actually had an NVIDIA engineer out here to talk about how they worked, and it was like a 2.5-hour live stream. So if you want more detail, that exists out there on our YouTube channel. But those 2 combined with the just raw performance improvements are how they got that 2.7x VR. The problem is we can't test it because games have to actually implement single pass stereo and lens match shading before it'll work. It's not just like a driver thing that suddenly magically fixes things or magically improves performance yet. So
other than that,
but I mean, it's super power efficient. It beats the 980 Ti by like 35%. Beats the Fury X by about 40%, 45% on average. It is the fastest GPU you can buy now, and I will be very curious come May 27th what that sell-through rate starts to look like. Right, like. It's obviously going to be a huge debate about how much inventory they have versus how much they're selling through, and NVIDIA will want to spin it very positively. But I get this impression that there's a lot of pent-up demand for this classification of card, right? The 980 Ti was okay, but the Titan X kind of soured people because NVIDIA wanted to charge $1,000 up front for that one before the 980 Ti came out. But this could be a enthusiast's dream card for quite some time, and AMD doesn't really have any competition for this segment coming until the end of probably 2017, to be honest with you. So the GTX 1080 will be at the top of the list for a while. I
mean, because right now we're looking at $620 for a 980 Ti, 565 to $600, like call it 570. For a 980, and this is just destroying the 980. I mean, it's for all intents and purposes, it's as fast as a pair of 980s in SLI. It's a significant boost over the 980 Ti. I mean, do we expect the 980 Ti and 980 prices to drop considerably in the next week or 2?
I would think so. I would imagine they're just kind of. I think. Like the day of the announcement, if Micro Center had some pretty good deals on 980 Ti cards, everybody else, Amazon and Newegg, haven't really seen the price drops yet. I imagine once, I think what's keeping people from dropping those prices is first of all, May 27th isn't here yet, and then also it's possible that maybe like the 1080 inventory is limited and they sell out in an hour, and then what? Right, you don't know. So if you're holding on to a bunch of stock of 980, 1080, or of 980, 980 Ti, if it were me, I'd start dropping that price. But I don't know what the arrangements are business-wise, but my guess is NVIDIA has some input in this in terms of what they can actually sell it for, and what the retailers can do versus what the add-in board vendors can do. So there's probably a lot of communication going on there in terms of how to deal with that. I don't know exactly how much is left just sitting out there, but it's not nothing, as you can tell when looking around Amazon and Newegg for sure.
Yeah, I'll be really curious to see what the supply is like, because I'm sure they also want to sell out all of their inventory of the 980 and 980 Ti, because I don't see this doing anything but destroying the 980 Ti's market.
Oh yeah, there's no reason why you should ever, like, you should not buy a 980 Ti. 980, right. I mean, unless the 989 Ti prices drop some considerable amount and then they kind of fall in line with the performance per dollar metrics that 1080 has kind of set for the high-end market,
right.
Then you might have that argument about, do you care about the new features? Do you care about the power efficiency? But as it is now, no, I don't think that's even an argument.
It seems like the 980 or the 980 Ti have the potential to be replaced by the GTX 1070. Well, not the 980 certainly has. It sounds like the 980 is going to get stomped out of the lineup and get replaced by the GTX 1070, because we're looking at like $379, I think. Is that right? $379 for the GTX 1070?
$379 MSRP, and then the Founders Edition thing on that one is $449. That's June 10th, I guess, availability.
Yeah.
I don't have hardware in yet to do to talk about performance stuff, but they did actually, kind of surprisingly, release the final specs on their website. So you have an idea of what the clock speeds are. The boost clock, the clocks are a little bit lower than the GTX 1080, but you do have a pretty significant reduction in CUDA core count, right? You're actually going from 2560 down to 1920. So that's what, a 20% drop in core count. So it'll be a significant drop.
Right.
The memory speed is less because it's GDDR5 instead of G5X.
I mean, technically, it's less CUDA cores than a GTX 980.
Right. Because GTX 980 has 2048. But it'll still be faster than 980 dramatically, right? Because it's running way higher clocks than that, and the memory performance is actually better as well. So it'll still be there. That they claimed that the 970 would be faster than the Titan X as well. Now that may be only in the VR stuff, right? Because of the things we talked about before, or it may end up being just in terms of raw performance, it's kind of right there. In which case, that would be super impressive if they can do a $379 part that is beating the 980 Ti that was $650 just a couple of weeks ago, while running at less power as well. Did they release the power on it? I don't know if they did. Maybe they didn't release typical power on it, but I'm excited for the 1070. I think a lot of people are going to be more interested in that, just in terms of, it's the price point more people are going to be able to afford, right? And the GTX 970, despite kind of some of the setbacks it had with the whole 3.5 gigs of memory versus 4 gigs of memory thing, it was still the most popular card of its generation by like a significant margin, maybe an order of magnitude, right? So I'll be curious to see how it lines up. They're rating this one at, where's it at? 150 watt TDP, so 30 watts less than the GTX 1080. So hopefully we'll have this in soon. Obviously we'll have it before the June 10th launch. But I did put out I was asking people on Twitter, for this card, I usually am only doing like 2 resolutions in terms of testing. Would you rather, I think 2560 by 1440 has to be tested.
Yes.
But would you rather, in addition to that, have 1080p or 4K? Would you rather have, this is what the vast majority of monitors still are, is 1080p. Or would you rather have 4K, both for a monitor you might want in the future or kind of a surrogate for like high resolution VR performance, et cetera? And it's been interesting to kind of see feedback on that. Some people obviously getting greedy and going, well, obviously we want all of the benchmark.
I was going to say, I can't imagine anybody saying anything other than I want all of them, because I want to see if there's any reasonable frame rate increase over the existing 1080p cards, which at some level doesn't matter unless you're a psychotic TWiCH gamer, or B, it's 4K monitors seem so far out for most people still, even for gaming. But I mean, has there been, outside of the bolus of humanity, probably myself included, that wants 1080 and 4K, has there been any sort of push in any particular direction?
Not really. I'm actually, I kind of expected the immediate response to be, it should be 1080p, should be the other resolution, but it seems to have been kind of mixed 50-50 so far. I'm going to have to go back and look through all of this after the fact. In my mind, I kind of look at it as, I hate saying it, but like 1080p is a solved problem, right? That's kind of what my mentality is because of all the hardware I see. Now, at some point, as you decrease the cost of video cards, if you get down to a $150 video card or even a $199 video card, that's probably not true. You can still see improvements in that price, but at $379, I feel like maybe I just need to do all three and kind of just say, look, 1080p is a solved problem here, right? And kind of say that it's this will solve all your problems, but so will the 390X, and so will the GTX 980 or the 970 for that matter, right? But hopefully I get the card in with enough time to make those competent decisions and statements, if nothing else.
Or at least make them with confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of out of nowhere, I may be exaggerating slightly, ARM has taped off a chip at 10 nanometers, which is huge.
Yeah. Well, it's actually very small.
Well, yeah. Huge news.
See what I did there?
Yeah, small process. Walked right into that one. Josh Walworth has the write-up on PCPro.com. You know, GPUs are at 16 nanometers. ARM's looking at 10 nanometer test chips. It's crazy, right? TSMC 16 nanometer FF Plus process technology was used for the GTX 1080. And TSMC looks to be trying to catch up, if not beat Intel, as quickly as they can in terms of, you know, getting to smaller processes. I mean, this is a big deal for mobile parts.
It is, and it's a big deal for ARM and its partners, right? So ARM does this. It's a test chip, right? It's not a production part. It's not something that would really make its way into any kind of particular device. But it is for certain. What ARM has to do is go to its partners and say, look, our next generation architecture, codenamed Artemis in this case, is ready for 10 nanometer. We spent the money proving that's the case. Now you can license it from us and build your next chips on it, right? And then 10 nanometers also, you know, ARM has to compete against, even though Apple is their partner, they want to compete against them in terms of making sure they can hit the most power efficient designs in terms of their actual GPU core architecture, their CPU architecture. So the inclusion of 10 nanometer and part of this is impressive from both ARM standpoint and their foundry partners being able to do this right away and as quickly as they have. So Josh does a really, really good job on this story of explaining what it is and why it matters, right? And what the potential benefits are of 10 nanometer FinFET as opposed to the 16 nanometer. Like, it's always interesting having these types of discussions, right? We're seeing the first 16 nanometer GPU come out this month, and we're like, yeah, but now what, right? So, and the mobile guys need it as much or more, probably more than any of the high-end guys because of the potential power savings.
Right.
I think they're talking about, I don't want to misrepresent these slides here because I didn't look at it before, but
a fairly healthy reduction in power.
Yes. Yes. Without a significant clock reduction, right? And it's still very early. But if you want to have test chip layouts kind of described to you and why they are, like, it's actually really interesting to see how they go from the design phase through the technology phase to like the synthesizing, maybe cessation is not a word, into actual production. And actually, I think they were expecting this chip back like this week. So I don't know if we'll know about what the actual results ended up being, but that was their plan, if nothing else.
They have a plan, people. In other cheerful news, Linksys routers are not going to block open source firmware, except on the Linksys open source routers. Well, actually, let me correct myself. So if you're not aware of it, June 2nd, new rules go into effect from the FCC. The FCC found that Doppler radar, FAA Doppler radar, is being interfered with by some third-party software being run on 5 gigahertz routers. Okay, you know, Doppler weather radar systems are kind of important for the FAA. We don't want planes to fall out of the sky. So you know, the biggest issue was having dynamic frequency selection being disabled, right? Because DFS was part of the 5 gigahertz band. So some people were disabling DFS and or playing around with routers working on entirely different chunks of spectrum than they were authorized for. So the FCC went into what basically amounts to full panic mode and said there may be no operating system updates, no firmware that allows the manipulation of these devices, which on one hand is reasonable. On the other hand, the response from TP-Link weeks ago was that they're just going to block, they're going to update their firmware so it blocks loading third-party firmware, period. End of story. June 2nd, we expect to see that happen with a lot of other router vendors. In terms of their WRT routers, Linksys has worked with the Open WRT group to make sure that because they can do it in hardware, to lock out the DFS control. Unfortunately, you know, it's not going to be on the other routers in Linksys's lineup. The legacy routers, the MaxStream routers, will have the firmware locked down from the host. We expect most router manufacturers to probably do the same thing on their 5 gigahertz routers. You know, the Open WRT group says, look, we're ready. We're ready to work with anybody that wants to step up and do this. So far, Linksys has been the only one. And in some ways, you know, Linksys had so heavily invested, you know, in the concept of running OpenWRT on a router from the factory that I think it was important for them to do that. And most other router manufacturers, if you may have noticed, you have had few, if any, updates to your router firmware. That's unfortunate, right? Because TP-Link has generally done a much better job than a lot of other router manufacturers in updating their firmware. But you may notice, like, you know, GDWRT or OpenWRT may make it easier to use features on your router. They may add some useful features to your router. They may have security updates that your router manufacturer can't be bothered to implement. And it's pretty much all that's going to be locked out for most routers on June 2nd. So props to Linksys for doing that for the OpenWRT routers. I wish they were doing that for some of the other models in their lineup. The other interesting thing we saw was phase change memory updates from IBM. They're now claiming a nice write-up on Engadget. I think Alan's got a write-up on PC Per, of course. You know, they're basically saying it's 50 times faster than Flash, cheaper than RAM, and when it ships, don't hold your breath. It's a little bit out, but the idea is that they're going to be like saving 3 bits of data per cell, increasing the capacity of the technology, making it much more practical. But this is like sort of the crystal-based storage that has been lurking around the corners of you know, long-term storage or high-density storage. But I'm really curious to see how long it takes for this to ship, because I just want to see the speed. I want to see the speed. I don't want to see how cheap they can get it, how fast they can get it. But that's a fun one to watch. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we should probably start wrapping it up. Are there any more? You're waiting on the 1070p for testing.
Yeah, I'm waiting on the GTX 1070. I will be not. I'll be in town. No, maybe next week I won't be here. I'm going to Asia. Going to the.
You might want to talk to your wife about that.
Yeah, she probably knows my schedule better than I do. At least I hope so, because we've had to arrange babysitters and stuff. But so I guess probably on next week's show, we will be right at the beginning stages of Computex, right? So expect huge onslaughts of, we'll see plenty of, you know, retail-ready GTX 1080s, plenty of new motherboards coming out. Intel has a processor platform release coming up. We'll see the GTX 1070 release. We'll probably see information like finally out and about instead of just leaked information about AMD's Polaris architecture chips, like the actual products that they're based on. So it's going to be a busy from, let's say, today through, I don't know, June 20th or so, where a ton of stuff is going to come out. If you're a high-end gamer, if you thought the GTX 1080 was an exciting product you're going to be interested in, then Intel's going to have processors they want to talk to you about. NVIDIA's going to want to talk to you about its 1070 as well. And then Polaris, a little bit more on the mainstream side, probably $300 price points and below, but still very competitive and pretty aggressive in those fields. So
nice.
A lot going on here. Plus, you know, if you got extra time, you can just play Doom, I guess.
I think that about sums it up.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, we did. Shannon's in Japan right now, possibly in Akihabara, spending all of her money on shiny, happy Japanese geek toys. But we did an entire episode on passwords, password managers, and two-factor authentication, which went live this morning. So if you have questions about password managers, using them, the level of security, cloud storage versus local storage, you know, two-factor authentication tools, you know, hardware you can buy if you want to automate 2FA or multi-factor authentication to secure your stuff, it is all in there, including basic guidelines for what a password should be and why you probably want a password manager if you've just been trying to memorize passwords, unless you have a photographic memory, in which case memorizing passwords is probably not a big deal for you.
No.
In that case, you know, it'd be a good episode for you, Ryan. Be good for you. Or horrifying once you realize how insecure most of the internet is. But
yeah, I have a feeling I would be pretty upset about it. I'd be a little sad.
Consistently upset.
Yeah.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this week's edition of This Week in Computer Hardware. You can find more episodes at twit.tv/Twitch. You can find at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton on the Twitters. And as always, we want to welcome you to join us in the chat while we're recording. And hey, thank you so much for listening. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.